Shadows, the horror movie heroes, by Clouds. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 10, Exercise. It seemed weird that a huge defining moment of her life would take place in a school nurse's office, but Kyoka had to get one for all somewhere, and she guessed that Recovery Girl's office was better than a half-clean training beach. It was ridiculously early, but the exercise started at noon, and the villains were supposed to arrive around sunrise so that they had time to go over the rules one final time and enter the test city a few hours before the hero students did. The company providing the civilians for the exercise had apparently arrived yesterday and had been setting things up in the city since last night. Kyoko was already wearing her villain outfit and had everything she was allowed to bring to the exercise, mostly stuff like flashlights and her pepper spray that had somehow gotten approved. So all that was left was to get her quirk and she'd be ready. She wasn't quite sure when her thoughts had shifted from if to when she got one for all, but it must have happened at some point because here she was ready to make a decision that would impact the rest of her life. Dad would be so proud. The door opened and All Might walked in, flanked on either side by Recovery Girl and Gran Torino. If it hadn't worked out so well, Kyoko would have been tempted to cringe at the audacity of seeking out her mentor's mentor to train her just because she didn't like the way All Might suggested. But at the end of the day, Gran's vision of what training for one for all should look like meshed a lot better with her fighting style than All Might's point and hit strategy. The last few weeks had been spent cleaning the beach like they had originally planned, but also meditating, studying, and listening to One for All as often as she could so that she was ready for today. "This is a great responsibility, young Jiro," All Might said solemnly, "a sacred torch that has been passed down for generations." Recovery Girl hit All Might in the knees with her cane. "Don't scare her off before she's even gotten the quirk, you nitwit." "It is a sacred responsibility," Gran Torino acknowledged, "but at the end of the day, I've known the holders of this quirk for decades, and it has been passed through some of the greatest heroes I know. Try to welcome it like an old friend, if you can." Kyoka swallowed dryly and nodded. "Okay, I'm ready." All Might smiled and plucked a hair from his head. "Eat this!" Izuku swallowed as he stared at the massive gates of UA. We're finally here." "Yeah," Hitoshi breathed, "and soon we're going to be back as students." They were both dressed in the villain outfits they'd bought, and Izuku was floored by how well everything had come together. They'd found armored shirts that were meant for people with destructive quirks, so they had at least some measure of protection. But they also found a lot of other things, like climbing harnesses that would allow them to rappel down buildings or hide up off of the ground in a pinch. For two bullied kids, Hitoshi thought they looked pretty cool. Izuku nodded in awe. "I know we've been preparing for this for weeks now, but still, it doesn't feel real." Hitoshi chuckled. "Yeah, I get it. But we've got all your plans, and we're ready for this, aren't we?" Izuku's depression hardened into determination. "Right. We're ready. Let's do this." The entire school was basically a maze, and if the two of them hadn't spent the last week studying every resource they could find on both UA and the Heroes versus Villains exercise, Hitoshi wasn't sure they would have been able to find the auditorium at all. As it was, they just barely avoided taking a few wrong turns and arrived at the auditorium to find it almost empty, with the exception of a few other fake villains wandering around in small groups and picking their seats. A few looked over at them as they came in, and Hitoshi made a note of who kept them in the corner of their eye after looking away. They'd have to watch out for those ones. Hitoshi didn't pay them too much mind, however, considering that his eyes were immediately drawn to the girl sitting by herself about halfway toward the back of the room. Izuku smiled as he recognized her too. "Jiro, you made it!" She jumped at Izuku's shout, her earphones twitching slightly before she relaxed and gave them a cocky grin. Hey, what a nice surprise. I thought you two would have gotten lost before you made it to the front gate. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. Very funny. What about you? This place is like a maze. How did you find this room? You must have been a part of the exercise before, right? Izuku asked. That's how you knew where to go? Nah, nothing so fancy. Jiro shook her head. I was hanging out with my mentor before this and he walked me down. Izuku's eyes widened hungrily. Mentor? Who? Your outfits look good, Jiro interrupted. I guess you ended up finding all the pieces you needed to finish them? Oh, yeah, and more, honestly. Hitoshi glanced down at his outfit. Is that your villain outfit? Or is it just what you pulled out of your closet this morning? Meh, Jiro shrugged. It's a little bit of both, not gonna lie. She was wearing baggy cargo pants, just like he and Izuku were, but she'd paired hers with combat boots that laced all the way up to above her knees, and a variety of belts hanging around her waist. Up top, she'd paired a dark gray tank top with a black half shirt that was basically just sleeves with a high neckline to keep it in place. In short, she looked like a badass, and Hitoshi had to turn away so he wouldn't stare too long. Well, it looks all right for something you just threw together last minute. We should probably go sit down, Izuku said, pointing to the crowds of people wandering in, small groups being led by various pro-heroes who must have found them wandering around the halls of UA. It looks like they're starting to round up the stragglers. Jiro gave them a questioning look, and Hitoshi rushed to explain Izuku wanted to sit in the back so we could watch everyone come in. The people who got here before us either did the exercise in previous years or did a lot of research just like we did. They're wild cards, Izuku added. They're probably not as useful as allies as people who showed up without getting lost, but they also could cause problems we're not expecting because they're less prepared. I want to see what we're working with, while simultaneously hiding your own strengths and weaknesses behind those masks of yours. Jiro nodded. Smart, but unnecessary. We're fighting the heroes, not these guys. Izuku shook his head. That's what they want you to think. But really, they've written the rules to make this just as much of a competition between the villains as it is a fight against the heroes. It enhances the realism of the scenario. In real life, there's just as much infighting as there is conflict between heroes and villains, maybe even more. Hitoshi explained, so yeah, once we get in there, it's kind of every man for himself. Jiro smirked. So what I'm hearing is that there's no hard feelings if I stab you two in the back? Of course not. Hitoshi smiled, because we'll be the ones stabbing you in the back first. Jiro gave him a look. Go do your creepy retcon or whatever. I'll see you in the arena. Hitoshi lowered his voice and leaned in closer. Not if we're doing our jobs right. Hitoshi, we gotta go. Izuku's eyes darted around, and Hitoshi realized he'd already taken out his notebook and his hands were twitching, like he was already trying to write all the thoughts and observations running through his head. Oh, yeah, catch you later, Jiro. Good luck. Jiro nodded. Right back at you. The two of them silently made their way toward the back of the auditorium, melting into the shadows as much as they could. Those of the new people who did see them either stared or immediately looked away, which meant that their plan to be intimidating or at the very least mysterious was working well. As soon as they sat down, Izuku's pen immediately started flying across the pages of his notebook, and Hitoshi got his out more slowly, but he was still mentally filing away how the other fake villains interacted with each other and what personality traits they could exploit later, if they really needed to. The villains were definitely at a disadvantage in this exercise, but Izuku and he had lived their entire lives at a disadvantage, so really, they were right in their comfort zone, and they were about to show everyone what they could do. Denki eyed the two guys in combat gear and swallowed. Yeah, he was definitely going to be steering clear of those guys. Mom grinned as she elbowed him in the ribs. What do you think, Sparky? Isn't this going to be fun? Denki gave a bright smile. Yeah, it's going to be great. His smile fell the moment that Mom looked away. It wasn't that he wasn't excited. It was going to be a lot of fun, but he was also kind of starting to freak out. Mom knew he wanted to be a hero, but she wasn't around a lot. So it had been a while since she'd actually seen him fight. He had to be good at combat, though, because that would be his only saving grace if he somehow bombed the academic portion of the UA entrance exam. He knew that there were other schools that might take him, obviously, but Mom had been so proud when he'd said that he was shooting for UA, and he didn't want to disappoint her, or himself, honestly. He'd be pretty bummed if he didn't make it in. Present Mike walked up onto the stage, and Danke couldn't help grinning. He'd been the one that found him and Mom when they had gotten lost on the way to the auditorium. It had been long enough since she'd gone here that either they'd remodeled or she'd just forgotten her way around. Either was a possibility, but Danke had been terrified that they were going to be late when Present Mike had finally found them wandering around the third floor and led them and a whole bunch of others here just in time. He had laughed and joked with them and the others they'd found for the entire time, so yeah, Danke was pretty sure he'd just discovered a new favorite hero. "Hello there, listeners!" Mike yelled. "Welcome to our annual Heroes vs. Villains exercise at UA High School. Even though all of you are good people and some of you are even pro-heroes IRL, this week you get to embrace your dark side and become heroes to our students by playing the villains." There was an awkward pause, and Danke was fairly certain they were supposed to cheer, but it was too late now, so Danke just cheered emotionally and hoped it counted for something somehow. "Love the enthusiasm," Mike grumbled. "All right, let's get back to it. The villains in this exercise, that's you, are trying to achieve objectives. You should have gotten a list of these bad boys in the big stack of paperwork we gave you when your applications were approved. They're going to be things like steal this painting, kidnap this victim, typical crimes that our students are going to come across in the field. For each objective that you manage to hold on to for the whole week and escape with at the end, you'll get some cold hard cash. So try to go home with as many as possible. Just to keep things interesting, you have to actually leave the city on the last day, though. Not just stashing your objectives somewhere and raking in the cash. That doesn't count." Danke wasn't here for the money, but he wouldn't deny it would be nice to have a little extra cash. Mom made a good amount, obviously, but it was always different spending money that he'd earned himself, and he wanted to help pay for UA somehow, assuming he actually got in. That meant, though, that they were up against a lot of guys who were only in it for the money and would do what was necessary to get it. So that would be interesting. "The hero's goal is to stop you," President Mike continued, "but that doesn't mean that they don't have other objectives too. They've got a list just like yours of things they can do for extra credit points, but this is things like finding lost children or doing a press interview. Typical hero stuff. Now, on to the fun part. Your weapons. You weren't allowed to bring any in with you, except for your quirk, obviously, but there will be some available inside the arena itself. It might require a little bit of work to get them. All of these are non-lethal paint rounds, even if the knives have a special coating that will rub off to show a hit. So don't worry about that when picking your weapons. You and the hero students will both have comms that link to the staff here at UA. So we'll make the call for how much damage is lethal. Once you're dead, you're out of the game, obviously. But we do have very nice rooms, so it's not going to be too boring for you. Same if the heroes arrest you, but there's a grace period there. You'll have 24 hours to escape before getting turned over to the teachers, so you better work quick, you dig?" Danke frowned. The heroes weren't supposed to kill people, were they? "All right, that's the big stuff out of the way," President Mike grinned. "Once we get into the city, you'll have until noon before the heroes get here. So if you have anything you don't want to get caught doing, get it done quickly. Remember, though, that you're not allowed to actually grab any of the objectives until the heroes are actually inside the city. You got it?" There was a quiet grumble of assent, and President Mike grinned. "All right, then, follow us to the buses and let's get on our way." The minute they arrived at the gates, all the villains scattered in every direction. Izuku and Hitoshi ducked into a building just inside the gates, and as soon as they found a room with a door that could actually close, Izuku dropped down cross-legged on the floor and pulled out his laptop. Hitoshi took off his jacket and stuffed it into his backpack. You'll be reaching out through my comms, right? As soon as I gain access, yeah. Izuku nodded, not looking up from the screen. The hero comms will obviously be able to communicate with each other, not just the teachers. So it's probably just a setting that I'll be able to mess with once I hack into the system. It should be easier than hacking the main school, thankfully. Hitoshi shrugged, taking off his combat pants and revealing the ripped jeans underneath. From what I know of Nedzu's personality, he'll make it possible for people to hack in for exercises like this, just to see if anybody will be crazy enough to try it. Izuku grinned. I guess it's a good thing that we're a little crazy then. Hitoshi pulled on a Hawks t-shirt over his armored undershirt and did a little spin. How do I look? Like a civilian. Izuku nodded in satisfaction. Good luck getting our weapons. I'll call you when I get our comms up and running. Hitoshi left him to his hacking and hurried out into the street. End of chapter.